Aloha, everybody. I'm Eva Andrade, and on today's episode of Faith in Politics, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to ask if unity is possible in the nation. We're going to look at Biden's 10 days in office, what has happened, and then we're going to talk about some of the legislative bills that have been introduced in the state of Hawaii. So let's chat about that. In times of tragedy, churches overflow, but that's hard to do when we're in a lockdown. Some churches are open, some are closed, and some are in that place in between. People of faith are trying to find out where they fit, not only in their churches, but in this country. And what's happening across this nation in the political realm, it's tearing this country apart. There is, by all accounts, a line drawn securely between the us and the them. Jesus gave us one of the best sermons on the us and them when he spoke to the crowds on the mountain. And this is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 14. And he shows us the way to change the political culture by taking a seat among them. So he begins with the them. Blessed are they who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, and those who are persecuted because of righteousness. And then he talks about the us. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say things about you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who came before you. So here's the thing. Because we are human, someone will always be creating an us and a them. But there is something we can do about it. According to that scripture, there will always be people who need the touch of a loving God. And when we shine his light into the darkness, people will see the good that we do because of our faith, and that will bring glory to God. And then his mercy and his goodness will touch the heart of all of humankind. And that, my friends, will ultimately change the world. And that's my thoughts for the week. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Jim Hochberg, back to the show today. He took a 2-week hiatus so that his wife, Janet, could join us on the March for Life. Welcome back, Jim.
Well, thanks. I hope I do as good a job as she did.
Now, here's the big question. Were you watching the show in those 2 weeks, Jim? And your answer better be yes.
Do you know how many times I saw that show?
Good.
Do you know how many times I saw that show?
we encourage everybody to make sure that if they haven't been watching the show or listening to the show live, that they actually go to YouTube and look for Kalo TV, look under the playlists, and find Faith in Politics. And you can go back to when Moses parted the sea, right? That's the early.
That's true.
That's true. So did you have any thoughts on the opening remarks today?
You know, I liked them. And I wish I could be more like that. But unfortunately, where our society today is kind of split down the middle with folks that think that's a good idea and folks that just want to win, so they're not going to be like that, I don't think it's going to be universally prevalent.
No, and I agree, and I'm glad that you said that because, you know, as I write this, I can see that there's people listening that are saying, that is so Pollyanna, you know, that's great, sounds wonderful. And even people who are not people of faith might be going, wow, you know, is Jesus really the answer to all things? And we're never going to make light about the fact that we serve Jesus and that everything we do here is because we have a faith-based foundation. So we're never going to apologize for that. I think I said several shows ago that this table is a table that Jesus is always going to be the guest of honor. So that's always going to be where we come from.
I think everybody in the end is going to bow their knee to Jesus. What I was actually more focusing on is the half of our society that doesn't think blessed is anybody. Blessed are the people that are meek, long-suffering, patient, because they can't win that way.
Well, I think for me, you know, to take it into modern terms is to be able to see people that are hurting today. So like, you know, these people that are on the other side of the aisle, they all have a heart and they all have something that's happened in their life.
Except the lawyers.
And
we don't.
Okay, you said that, and
Yeah.
this is taped, so we'll make sure that people know that it was you that said that. But see, the point is that Jesus always looked to the heart of the issue, and
Correct.
he always looked at the heart of the person. Even the people that disagreed with him, he always went to the heart. And so that's our message is to find that heart place. So let's do this before we jump in. First of all, we really want to thank Kalo TV for the hard work that they did on the March for Life.
That was fabulous.
It was fabulous, and I got so much feedback on that. What we might do is, in fact, let's do a call out right now. I want you, if you guys were touched by the March for Life, to send me an email at eva@kalotv.com, and I want you to tell me your story. And the first person that gives a good testimony, and I won't say good testimony, the first person that sends in an email, we're going to make another swag bag for you, because I don't know about you, Jim, but I was inundated with texts and emails and phone calls from people who were really touched with that wonderful event, that virtual event.
I don't do very much social media, but I was watching the broadcast with Janet, and she's had her iPad out, and she was like reporting to me. I guess people could
we were
watch
chatting
it and,
live
and make
yeah.
comments or something, because she was reporting to me, oh, somebody said this, somebody said that. But it was actually kind of an interesting thing. I'd like to do that for the Super Bowl, but like I said, I'm not on those social media
Well,
things.
Super Bowl has its own fans, but it's not too late for you to watch the virtual March for Life. So look for Kalo TV under YouTube, and you can find the full 2-hour fantastic event. And you want to share it, you want to send it to your friends, because I promise you that everybody who watches this is going to be touched in some way. And we really appreciate the hard work of all the people behind the scenes that made it happen.
And let me just say that my wife is a very courageous woman.
She gave her testimony.
Yeah.
And for those of you that were watching the show and listening to the show the last 2 weeks, Janet was our co-host. And I kept giving a teaser. If you want to hear Janet's testimony, you've got to watch the show. So please make sure you do that, because I promise you that something in that entire 2 hours is going to move you. And I think that it's a good thing. It's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing that I want to do is I want to thank the pregnancy resource centers who all participated in the last 2 weeks. We got to talk to all 6 of them, but some of you have texted me and emailed me and called me and were touched actually about what the pregnancy resource center is doing, because not everybody knows. But I have to apologize that in our last interview with A Place for Women in YPO, we moved so fast through the interview that Stacy Jimenez didn't have a chance to actually talk about the resources that they offer. So I just want to take a moment and let you know some of the good work that A Place for Women in YPO is doing. So in addition to the current services that they already do, they do the pregnancy testing, limited ultrasounds, evidence-based options, education, abortion recovery classes. They've partnered with a local doctor now, this is really important, to do the abortion pill reversal. And they also plan to continue to do ultrasounds as needed. Emotional support resources is what they do. And the service allows a woman who regrets her decision of starting the chemical abortion process to actually have hope for the life of her child. So make sure that you check out A Place for Women for that. They also have an embrace group that they've brought to Oahu, and it's a 12-week support group for single pregnant moms. And their first session is starting on February 3rd. So you want to make sure that you check that out. But their biggest highlight, and this is really what I want to focus on, their biggest highlight is they're bringing a mobile ministry to Oahu. So A Place for Women in YPO, they've affiliated with the ICU Mobile, who already has 38 medical mobile clinics running on the mainland. So now we're going to have that right here in Hawaii.
Does that mobile clinic have the ultrasound in it?
Yes, so that
Wow.
they can take it out into the community and provide this service
Wow,
to
that's
women
incredible.
it's incredible. And I think that we really want to give them shout out because they're going to be able to touch vulnerable women who normally don't do that. And then they hope to have a medical clinic on Oahu by mid-2021. So they're doing a lot of good work. However, they do need some funds. And so I do want to encourage you that if you're looking for a place to plug in some funding to promote life in Hawaii, then check out A Place for Women in Waipio and find out how you can partner to make that happen. So apologies to A Place for Women for cutting them off so quickly, but they're doing a lot of good work, as is all of the pregnancy resource centers. So let's jump now into what's happening national. We have just a few minutes left, Jim, but I want to touch really briefly and get your thoughts on Trump's impeachment, his second impeachment. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
You know, it's sad that the Democrats in Congress, in the House and the Senate, need to just chase him down because he left office without what my QAnon friends thought was going to be some kind of a military over. So I don't know. Anyway.
It's still making its rounds, those emails. It's like they're not giving up hope.
I know. And I did see, and see, the one thing we always have to say, because it's true, when you see something online, it doesn't mean that it's true. Because not only can people use, Photoshop kind of tools to make things look official,
deep fake videos.
They can do it with the video. So like they can take a video of you and me talking using our own voices and the phrasing of our words, chop it up and rejoin it together with us saying something completely different that we weren't even talking about.
So if you ever see anything on the internet with me encouraging people to go to Planned Parenthood, you know it's a fake, because I would never do that.
And so to draw that into your question, I did see something on, I believe it was John Solomon's Just the News, whatever it is, blog, that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, actually said they were going to go forward with the trial, even though they knew it wasn't going to go through, because it was good for their base and bad for the Republican base.
But what do you?
And that is not the purpose of the provision in the U.S. Constitution to impeach and remove the president. And
the Constitution also says that the Chief Justice is supposed to oversee it, but Roberts has said he's not going to do it. So what do you make of that?
Well, maybe he's not going to do, because you can't guess what's in between people's ears, right? I don't know what his motivation is, but he might not want to do it because the guy's not the president. Why would he want to put his, legacy reputation on something that's just a political thing? I don't know. But even worse than that, Senator Leahy's going to run it? I mean, you got to be kidding me.
No, it's almost like a kangaroo court in the sense where, they're not, I heard they're not going to have witnesses either. So it's just going to kind of be.
It's just going to be a vote.
Like it was in the first time.
Well, okay, so then let's squeeze into the last minute the third party Patriot. So I saw online an FEC filing that said Trump created the Patriot Party at the Federal Election Commission. And then a couple of days later, he came out and said he wasn't going to do that. So assume that both of those pieces of information are actually true facts. It's the art of the deal. You've got the U.S. Senate getting ready to vote on whether to remove him from office and prohibit him from running for office again. He starts a new party. What's the message? Okay, senators, I'll take you out. I'm going to take you out. The Republicans will lose, and the Patriot Party will lose until the Patriot Party is strong enough to beat the Democrats. You want to lose your job? And so now they're not going to vote to impeach. So it's the art of the deal, I think.
Well, I think the important thing is knowing that we have to stay plugged in, understand, make sure we're checking out everything. Now, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to ask if unity can be achieved. And we're going to look at a couple of clips from Charlie Kirk and Tulsi Gabbard. So we'll be right back.
We have a mission here at Kalo TV to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear. And today, we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs, showcase solid biblical teaching, and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back. And now we're going to dive into a question I know that everybody's asking at the breakfast table, lunch, dinner is, can unity actually happen in the United States? And I think before we jump into that, what I'd like to do, Jim, is to get your thoughts on a clip that Charlie Kirk did an interview with Pastor Jack Hibbs. And they were talking about various things, but there's a point of the clip where Charlie begins to talk about the attack that is coming on the churches and that the churches need to be prepared for this. So I'd like to get your thoughts on this clip.
The other issue with that, and where the Christian church is now going to be tried, and guess what, Jack? You're going to pass the trial because you're already in the midst of it.
We're in it now.
It's not as if like you're waiting for it to start, but there's some pastors 20 miles from here, 30 miles from here, they think that they're going to be spared. And maybe they will in this moment, because the current power structure does not want to obliterate the American church. That is not right.
This is important.
They want to get rid of the churches they don't like. They want to get rid of the disagreeable churches.
I've read about this
And they
before.
want obedient churches, because they know if they get rid of all the churches, that will spark an uprising. But if they have a church that does what it's told to do, if they have a church that will give the correct sermons, that will never mention life, that will never come out and talk about the biblical case against illegal immigration, but instead will toe the party line, and that will host the correct ceremonies, never get political, then that church won't get audited and that church won't be investigated.
Jim, what I'd like to get your thoughts specifically on that clip is, the question that we're dealing with in this segment is, can there be unity right now in the United States with all the craziness? Now, when you've got churches and people of faith afraid that the government is going to come after them, which is what we're hearing, is this something that we need to be paying attention to? And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because this is an area that you fight all the time.
So, first of all, I would say I disagree with Charlie. I don't think the government's going to accomplish the closing of any churches, because the examples are the Soviet bloc and China. They just go underground and they strengthen because they are not, quote unquote, permitted churches. So I don't think he's correct. I think the church will be moved out of its safe zone, but that happened in the first century anyway.
Well, the bigger question he's asking is, when you've got the government already, we've got a president who is prepared all kinds of executive orders. He's made some proclamations, all kinds of things, and some of those are making some of the pastors nervous. So what are we watching for, and what should we be concerned about?
Well, okay, so there are a lot of issues that will drive the church underground. There are. Transgender issues. If churches are considered public accommodations, which in the state of Hawaii, the Public Accommodation Discrimination Enforcement Agency wants churches to be considered public accommodations, so it can penalize them for their biblical beliefs related to the things in the anti-discrimination against sexual orientation and gender identity issues. So that's one of them. The Federal Communication Commission can, deal with broadcast licensing issues, like requiring equal time for contrary political opinions, or even, I suppose, religious opinions to be broadcast according to the licenses, which, if you remember, when Obama was president, he wanted to change to have that, I forget what they called it, equal time. It wasn't called equal time, but something like that, where you had the fair use doctrine. There's that kind of stuff. There's whether some very progressive cities will allow churches to get building permits. There's issues locally, not nationally, of whether the exemption from solemnizing marriages between people other than a man and a woman will be required in order to have your solemnization license. So in all the areas where the church operates in government-sanctioned capacities because of licensing or the public accommodation issue, there are a lot of areas where the church can become either milquetoast in order to comply and get to keep their good relations with the government, which is the Church of Laodicea, or they will become an underground, solid, Bible-believing, Christ-honoring, evangelical sheep gathering churches.
Well, I think that's kind of what I wanted to address in the opening. You know, I made the comment about people trying to find their place even in their churches, because not everybody agrees with that. There are a lot of people that think the church should just be a place that preaches a gospel message, that doesn't get involved in politics, that should never get into these controversial issues, that everything should be about love and salvation. On the other hand, there are churches that believe that politics is a very strong place in the church, and that pastors should preach from the pulpit about issues, and that people should be made aware of things that are happening at the state capitol and at our Capitol building in Congress. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I've been thinking about it because, 160 million people voting for the first time ever in a presidential election, it sounds like a tidal wave. But in thinking about that, actually, it wasn't a tidal wave. It was happening over many, many decades that this current 50-50 split in the philosophy of American people has been occurring. So I don't think unity can be achieved because it's not a tidal wave one-time event. It's more like the erosion that created the Grand Canyon. How do you fill that back up? Or even the little Grand Canyon on Kauai. How do you fill that back up?
Well, I think that's a one scoop at a time,
One
right?
spoon at a time.
One spoon at a time, because I know there's that thing about the starfish, right? It makes a difference to this one starfish, right? That's the important thing. So we're not going to sit here and tell everybody what they should and shouldn't be doing, but what we are going to say is that you are a citizen of the United States and you need to pay attention to what's happening at your state capitals. You need to plug in, but we do it in a way that plugs into our gospel values, right? So
Correct.
Everything we're doing is grace and mercy. But again, I always tell people that when we say grace and mercy, we're not saying that we should lay down and let people walk all over us, and never mistake that for weakness, because it's not weakness.
Well, and we're going to talk later about the 1776 project.
Yes.
We have people in the audience right now that are born after 1954.
Ah.
And so all they know is the current charitable deduction, 501c3 status of churches not being allowed to participate in elections.
Well, I think
But before 1954, and as a matter of fact, in 1776, it was the pastors in the pulpit that led to the creation of the Declaration of Independence and the United States of America against the British. It was the pulpit.
Okay, so we want to make sure that you stay tuned, because we are going to talk about several of President Biden's executive orders, and one of them is the 1776 Commission. He's getting rid of that. So stay tuned for that. But what I want you to listen to now is there was an interview that Tulsi Gabbard did on Fox News, where she talked about domestic terrorism. And as we're talking about unity, when people feel like people are watching them and they're going to be coming down hard on everything that they do and say, when they're censoring them, when they feel like that what they're saying is going to be attacked by their government, then how can unity be achieved? So let's listen to that clip.
Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, Democrat, joins us now. Congresswoman, great to see you. I know you've just been out of the job for a week or two. Are you surprised they're pushing forward with this extra surveillance on would-be domestic terror?
It's so dangerous. As you guys have been talking about, this is an issue that all Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians should be extremely concerned about, especially because we don't have to guess about where this goes or how this ends. When you have people like former CIA Director John Brennan openly talking about how he's spoken with or heard from appointees and nominees in the Biden administration who are already starting to look across our country for these types of movements similar to the insurgencies they've seen overseas, that in his words, he says, make up this unholy alliance of religious extremists, racists, bigots. He lists a few others and adds at the end, even libertarians. So when you look at their process and they start looking at, okay, what characteristics are we looking for as we're building this profile of a potential extremist? What are we talking about? Religious extremists? Are we talking about Christians, evangelical Christians? What is a religious extremist? Is it somebody who's pro-life? I mean, what where do you take this? You start looking at, okay, well, obviously you have to be a white person, obviously likely male. Libertarians, well, if anybody who loves freedom, liberty, maybe has an American flag outside their house, or people who, attended a Trump rally. Once you start walking this down the path, you see where it leads to a very dangerous undermining of our civil liberties, our freedoms in our Constitution, and a targeting of almost half of the country.
Ilhan Omar says this. We already have laws on the books, sorry, but you are just going to have to learn to apply them. The other thing I thought was interesting, Congresswoman, I don't see any FBI demanding more tools. They feel they got the tools. These are congressional leaders or members who feel as though they're so freaked out by Trump supporters, they still can't understand why anyone would support him. They want to get to the bottom of it. And do you think the whole deprogramming of Trump supporters, this new buzzword among detractors and Democrats, has anything to do with this?
Yeah, I think it does very directly. I think just on the FBI front, I read a great op-ed this morning from a former FBI agent who made a very strong case for why this new domestic terror law introduced by Adam Schiff is wrong and is directly going to undermine our constitutional rights and freedoms. This whole effort, whether you're talking about this bill or people saying that we have to deprogram these Trump cultists and people who voted for Trump because they've been radicalized, all of this just goes to further tear our country apart. And it moves towards the thing Joe Biden said in his inauguration speech that he shouldn't happen, which is a dehumanization of your opponent. And that's where his voice is so necessary right now. He is the president of this country. He delivered this speech, his voice, himself, speaking to the American people. He needs to denounce people like John Brennan and their statements, bills like the one Adam Schiff put forward, and truly speak to the American people about how we must come together around the Constitution, around our Bill of Rights, around these rights that have been endowed to us by our Creator. If he had your leadership ability, he would do it. Maybe he still will. That's why she ran for president. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, thanks so much. Thank you, Brian.
Yay! I know that clip is just so awesome, and so if people didn't see it on Fox News, we wanted to make sure that they listen, because I think that Tulsi did a fantastic job of knitting it all together.
She's a good communicator.
She's a very good communicator, and the thing about Tulsi is she's never quite fit in, the perfect role of being a Democrat, right? I mean, and so she speaks the truth.
Well, she's a trained killer, she's an Army person, and Democrats generally aren't like that. But before we run out of time, what I want to tell everybody is important about that clip. They can do what they're talking about because of all of our information that is online, that is never going to disappear, that can be located and found, and we can be judged by what we've said and what we've posted, Googled, and all that stuff. It's kind of dangerous, scary.
And the other thing, too, in these last few seconds that we have is to, again, remember that our voice is necessary and important in this great country, that we all rise and say what we need to say. So we want to make sure that you come back for the next section, because we're actually going to be talking about several of President Biden's executive orders, and we're going to let Jim explain to you what an executive order is. So, Jim, 10 seconds. Thoughts?
No unity until the other side is willing to let us be us.
All right. We'll see you in a few seconds. Bye.
It's no secret that Kalo TV is the only local Christian TV station reaching the islands of Hawaii with 24/7 Christ-centered content. Just how important is Kalo TV to our culture?
Think about it. This year has been unprecedented. The pandemic lockdown, churches closed, religious freedom, a nation divided, cultural unrest. If there's ever a time that we need Christ-centered content, it is now.
Our community is struggling. Depression, suicide, unemployment, lack of purpose. Many of us are without hope. In fact, some of us are considered non-essential.
Non-essential? That's absurd. In fact, there's never been a more crucial time that the church is essential. We have the hope of Christ, the answer for our time.
and Kalo TV is committed to broadcasting the good news across Hawaii.
And that's why we're reaching out even more to those in need of God's love. Here's how.
We're starting a new initiative called Kalo Outreach, where we're going into our local communities and becoming the hands and feet of Christ.
We continue to create new and original programs that will reach every generation with the hope of Jesus.
We are adding new local and international programs to Kalo TV. After all, it is our intention to be a bright light to Hawaii and beyond.
Look, it hasn't been easy for any of us. In fact, if you need prayer, we are here for you.
And if you need encouragement, please tune in, whether it's on air, online, or on social platforms. Our vision is to provide uplifting content.
Would you join us as we broadcast the good news? This is our opportunity to come together as a community.
Right now is a pivotal time to invest in Hawaii. First and foremost, let's pray together for Hawaii. And for those who are able to, here are some ways that you can give.
As we are that the sun will set tonight and rise again tomorrow morning, so is our hope in Christ.
Kalo TV, the Aloha station, broadcasting Aloha 24/7.
Welcome back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the executive orders that have been signed by President Biden in his first 10 days or so of office. And just so that we're clear, when we're looking at the amount of executive orders that were done by the president, all the presidents before him have not done this many executive orders in this short of a time. And so there's been a lot of flurry. There's a lot of things happening. But Jim, the very first one that I want to focus on is one that I know had a particular place of it really bothered you, and that was when President Biden did away with President Trump's 1776 commission. So why don't you talk to us about that?
Okay, and first let me talk generally about what happens between presidential administration in the transition. So I would say Bill Clinton, after George H.W. Bush, did executive orders to get things in line for his political party's philosophy, at the beginning without congressional action. And then George W. Bush. George H.W. Bush was before Clinton. George W. Bush was after. He did some new ones to switch things back to the Republican political philosophy. And then Obama did some after Bush.
Which is very common.
And Trump did some after Obama. But in none of those scenarios was there this really kind of semi-vicious attitude between the groups, where it's so bad with the Biden are all talking about this unity issue. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about a unity issue between the two groups, it's so counterproductive to do what all the other presidents did, which is switching the political culture of a pen. Obama said, I have a phone and a pen. I can do whatever I want. That's disunifying, because it's slapping in the face the people who liked the things that were done before. That's generally speaking. So let's talk about this. So there's an executive order that was looking at undoing the November 2nd, 2020, just over a year on Election Day. It was Executive Order 13958. That was passed by or signed by President Trump November 2nd, 2020. It established the President's Advisory 1776 Commission. President Biden's got a one-line address to that just says it is hereby revoked. That was part of his executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government.
Jim, I'm glad that you are mentioning this specifically, this executive order, because a lot of the talking heads, whether they're liberal or conservative, are focusing on that word equity.
That's what I want to talk about.
Racial equity. Good.
Well, it's not racial equity. It's bigger than that.
Yes.
So, Section 1, policy. The word used at the beginning is Equal opportunity is the bedrock of American democracy, and our diversity is one of our country's greatest strengths. Equal opportunity is what is addressed in the 1776 Commission. So this executive order starts out saying equal opportunity. It's not really about equal opportunity. You can tell from the title it's about equity. So equal opportunity means we all start at the same place. Equity means we all end up at the same place. Those are very different concepts. And what this policy, what this order says is a historic movement for justice has highlighted the unbearable human costs of systemic racism. But we don't have systemic racism. If we did, no person of color would ever have succeeded because the system would have kept them from succeeding.
Now, to be fair, because there are people that don't agree with that statement that you made. There are people that truly believe there is systemic racism, and they would take issue.
They are wrong, and I will say it, because people lack critical reasoning. If you logically refute a statement, they're just making it up.
Well, I find it interesting because a lot of people that have this argument with you are white, right? That are saying that
they're
this
guilty
exists.
of what is that? They're white. Gosh, what is it? I forget the phrase. So the 1619 Project was started by a publication by the New York Times. It wasn't even a governmental thing. It wasn't a policy statement. It was somebody wrote it up, and that's why the 1776 Commission was created by President Trump. But let me go on here. There is no systemic racism, and I can prove it because Barack Obama was elected president. And if there was systemic racism, he never would have had a chance. Then it goes on to say, our nation deserves an ambitious whole-of-government equity agenda that matches the scale of opportunities and challenges we face. Equity is the result. Equal opportunity is the starting place. It says, next, it is therefore the policy of my administration that the federal government should pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved. And it goes on, lists a whole bunch of things, including SOGI stuff and whatever have you, that sexual orientation and gender identity. And then it goes on, because advancing equity requires a systematic approach to embedding fairness in decision-making processes. Decision-making processes, that's the end result, okay? Executive departments and agencies must recognize and work to redress inequities in their policies and programs that serve as barriers to equal opportunity. They aren't barriers to equal opportunity. As the 1776 Commission report will tell us when we get to it in a minute, what the Declaration of Independence says is because we are all created equal, we have this form of government. Those are really serious topical differences that aren't addressed when this stuff is talked about. So then finally, I want to quote this sentence. The federal government's goal in advancing equity is to provide everyone with the opportunity to reach their full potential. That's the outcome. Okay. So because the 1619 Project that started as a publication of the New York Times got into the education system, and what that project says is the United States of America started in the year 1619, not 1776. That's kind of odd because if you had civics class from 1776 until maybe the middle of Obama's presidency, you all knew that the United States was started by the Declaration of Independence, which is why we have 4th of July back in 1776. So hang on, bear with me here.
Well, I'm just thinking that because of what you just said, that there are people driving right now who are like, wait, what? And they're trying to process what you just said. The younger generation probably may not have heard some of this, but the older generation is probably freaking out right now.
But when you tie together this executive order with the 1619 Project and the 1776 Commission, it'll make your head explode.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm saying.
So the 1619 Project says America started in 1619 because that was when the first slave ship from Africa hit the New World. And their position is that everything that we are today is because of that, and therefore the United States started then. But to tell you the truth, the French were here, the English were here, the Spanish were here. The United States.
Well, how about the Native Americans who were here long before anybody
showed up? And they had
up?
slaves too, because they used to solve political differences through slavery as well. However, so because this was gaining, this 1619 project was gaining so much steam in the education system across the country, President Trump very wisely, in my humble opinion, which, by the way, I recently learned that's what those letters mean in a text. I never knew what that was. Anyway, he created this commission in November of 2020. And basically, they talk about the Declaration of Independence. They talk about the Constitution. They talk about racism and all this stuff. So the task of national renewal, the purpose of the commission was to do a report and then get the report on the truthful historic origin of our country into the education system. Now, if you're pushing the 1619 project, you can't read the Declaration of Independence and the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers in school because it completely refutes the 1619 project. So the conclusion of the report is it's the task to renew the commitment to the historical truth of the country. So this report proclaims, in the words of our forefathers, used 2.5 centuries ago, quote, "For the support of the Declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." Oh, that is what Biden doesn't like. That's powerful commitment. That is commitment that is really hard to beat, unless you have a cell phone and a pen and you can sign an executive order that gets rid of the commission, which can't do the rest of its work. Its work was not to do a report. Its work was to do a report and then address how to keep America strong. And there's a whole section in Appendix 4 about the incompatibility of identity politics with the principles of American founding government. And it's interesting. Identity politics divide Americans by placing them perpetually in conflict with each other. The extreme ideology assaults and undermines the American people of equality in several key ways. First, identity politics attacks self-government. Second, it divides Americans into oppressed and oppressor groups. Activists of identity politics propose to punish some citizens, many times for wrongs their ancestors committed or allegedly committed, while rewarding others. Third, identity politics denies the fundamental moral tenets of the Declaration that human beings are equal by their nature. Fourth, identity activists often are radicals whose political program is fundamentally incompatible not only with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, but also with the rule of law embodied in the United States Constitution. So in conclusion, identity politics is fundamentally incompatible with the principles of equality enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. All Americans, especially educators, should understand identity politics for what it is: rejection of the principle of equality proclaimed by the Declaration of Independence. The solution is to use the actual original documents in the teaching of the American founding, which the 1619 Project does not want to do. Let's grab some other executive orders real quick.
Well, there's been several. There was one on gender identity. He did one on that. He's done one on immigration. It wasn't an executive order, but he did do some kind of proclamation on DACA. So he's done several. In fact, if you want to see all of the president's executive orders and his proclamations and that sort of thing, you want to go to whitehouse.gov and you click on the link there that gives his press, and you'll see everything that the president has done. And I think that you should follow what the president is doing. And the same thing with
this report, the 1776 Commission report. I just Googled it and it came right up.
Yeah, and they've done a lot. And depending on where you are on the political spectrum, there's going to be some of these executive orders you're really going to like, and there's going to be some that you're not going to like. But it's your duty as a citizen to know what it is that your president is doing. So, Jim, in the last 30 seconds, what is an executive order?
So an executive order is just an order that the president has the authority as the head of the executive branch to tell his departments. But more important than what an executive order is, when you see the executive orders of this president doing things like getting rid of the 1776 commission, that's why we don't have unity. That's the problem.
And that's the question we've been asking is how do we make unity in all of this craziness? So when we come back from the break, we're going to take our eyes off of national and we're going to put it right here in the state of Hawaii, and we're going to look at legislative bills that have been introduced this legislative session. We'll be right back.
We have a mission here at Kalo TV to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs, showcase solid biblical teaching, and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back. And now we're going to turn our focus to the legislature here in the beautiful state of Hawaii. And we're basically going to just talk about various different subject of bills. We're not referring to any bill number. We're not getting into that sort of detail. But I want you, the listener, to understand the types of bills that have been introduced by the legislature here. And as we move through the legislative session, we'll get a little bit more detail. And if you want to know positions that Hawaii Family Forum is taking on any of these bills, please visit us at hawaiifamilyforum.org. Make sure you sign up to get our alerts, because as bills pop for hearings, we'll give you all the information on how to testify. And coming up next week, Jim and I are going to talk about the legislative process here in Hawaii. So you want to make sure you come back next week.
And the reason that we're not going to get into bill numbers today is because they introduce thousands every year. And it's good to know topically what they're thinking of, but only some of those bills actually get dealt with. And when they start getting dealt with, that's when we go to the bill numbers themselves.
That's right. And when we talk next week, we're going to tell you why this legislative session has its own set of challenges, because it's a virtual session. So again, make sure you come back next week. So anyway, so some of the bills that have been introduced, we want to start with, first of all, there's probably about 12 or so minimum wage bills. So there are some legislators that feel like we need to raise the minimum wage here in Hawaii. The advanced practice registered nurses are lobbying for two different issues that I find very interesting. As we know, we don't want to come down too hard on the advanced practice registered nurses, because they do a lot of good work in the community. But they're lobbying right now to participate in Our Care, Our Choice, which means that they would be able to avail themselves as practitioners of the assisted suicide law.
And what that means is take the place of the doctor.
Yes. And they also want to be able to take the place of the doctor in abortions. So those are two bills that are...
Which means the doctors won't be involved in those two things.
But, I just kind of want to give you guys a heads up that this has happened in other states. It's very hard to lobby against these kind of bills when you have an organization like this. And even doctors, OBGYNs, who are coming out and saying that this is a good thing on the abortion issue. So we'll keep you posted on that. We've got a couple of...
Can we go back to the minimum wage thing so people understand? Because it sounds great, right? Oh, everybody gets paid more money. Okay?
Yeah.
The problem is, even aside from how COVID has killed the economy, so this is like not the right time to require employers to pay anything more. They probably need to get reductions in what they have to pay. Even if the economy was booming, businesses, generally speaking, get hurt really bad when they're required to increase their cost of employees, because that's something they really have a hard time controlling. They need the employees to do the work to do their business, and every penny that they have to pay more because the government said so comes out of the ability to do their business.
Yeah, and this is definitely a discussion that has to take place, because I think that people, they put themselves so solidly on one side or the other that there's no discussion about things like this. How does it affect small business and stuff like that? So we definitely want to keep you posted on that. There are a couple of good bills that were introduced. One would prohibit the abortion of a fetus that is capable of feeling pain. And that is Senator Favela and Senator Gabbard actually introduced that bill.
And that actually was in the last round.
Yes. It was actually heard in the House Health Committee, and it was killed in the House Health Committee. It was not deferred.
No pun intended.
Yes, it was killed. I mean, they heard it and they held it in committee, which that's normally a statement in and of itself.
But prior to that, it never would have even gotten a hearing. So the people that wanted the hearing kind of claimed a political victory because they got to go and say what they liked, but they didn't really accomplish
it's true.
anything.
And I said at the time publicly that it was the first pro-life bill that we actually got to go testify on at the Capitol. So, baby steps. It's like, here in Hawaii, we have to be grateful for all of the little things. Another good bill is one that would ensure the protection and promotion of the health and well-being of all infants born alive. That was the actual bill that had been heard. So again, that was Senator Favela and Senator Gabbard. So we thank them for introducing some good bills.
And by the way, that's the dad of the Tulsi Gabbard
yes, that we did the
earlier.
clip today. And actually, we will be having Senator Gabbard on the show. I've already talked to him and he's willing, so we're working out some of that. So that'll be good. As Jim knows, there is a plethora of bills relating to elections that are going through right now. So we can't go through all of them, but some of the interesting ones, one would lower the voting age in the state from 18 to 16. There's one that would propose a constitutional amendment to limit the terms of people in the legislature. Are we ready for this? They're limiting.
Ask me how many years.
They're limiting to a maximum of 16 years.
Yeah, what kind of term limit is that?
I just laughed. But hey, it's a baby steps. Again, we have to be grateful for
it's not going to pass.
There's one that would establish cause and procedures for the impeachment of the governor, lieutenant governor, and appointive officers, which I thought was quite interesting. I want to make a disclaimer here. I'm not claiming that we're going to be testifying on all these bills. We're just throwing out the general idea of some of the bills that are out there. Because what are you going to hear? You're going to hear that they're focusing only on economic issues, right? That's what you're going to hear in all of these interviews.
That's their press release.
That's their press release. That this is what they're going to focus on. But it doesn't mean that all these other issues haven't been introduced and that they might potentially get hearings.
And you also have to realize that focusing on economic issues doesn't mean to improve the economy, because having a $17 minimum wage is not going to help the economy.
No, it's crazy. So there's also a bill that proposes a constitutional amendment to provide that freedom of speech does not include the expenditure of money to influence elections.
So I actually did that lawsuit here, the Citizens United lawsuit in Hawaii, and it has long been federal constitutional law that spending money in politics is speech.
I'm just cracking up because Jim and I have been doing this a long time. So some of this stuff, it just for us is like it makes perfect sense, and others like we're thinking, what are they thinking? But here's another interesting one that Jim and I, when we do our dog and pony show, which we go into churches and we do education on how to get involved in the legislative process.
And it's fun. Church pastors, hey, call Eva and sign us up.
Send me an email and we'll come out to you. Well, once the lockdown comes down, but we can do some virtual.
We can do it at night. Yeah.
But so anyway, this is an interesting one, Jim. This one would require the language. I mean, this is so common sense. I'm laughing that they have to do a bill. They're requiring the language and meaning of any proposed constitutional amendment and ratification question to be simple, concise, and direct.
But you know what? Who remembers this? Shall the Constitution
be
state
amended to allow
to empower the legislature to reserve marriage to opposite-sex couples?
I know.
That was, do you want same-sex marriage, yes or no?
I know. It was so fun. And then people thought if they were voting yes, that it actually meant no, and vice versa. So we did a huge educational campaign to get people to understand that. There are tons and tons of voting by mail kind of things, places of deposit. There's a bunch of those kind of things. And I'm sure we're going to see some of those definitely moving.
And on that point, I do want to remind everybody that in 2019, the Democrat Congress after they took over in 2018, they actually passed a election law bill to the Senate, but it didn't go anywhere, requiring nationally that all elections be done with paper ballots.
Well, we might have to revisit some of this great work they did back then. There's bills that are going to legalize the recreational use of marijuana, which I find very interesting because by the same breath, they're also putting bills out that bans the sale of flavored tobacco products. Why? Because they know that here in Hawaii, there is a huge amount of our youth using those e-cigarettes. So I think it's real funny that on one hand, they can say, well, let's just legalize marijuana for recreational use. However, we have an e-cigarette problem.
But it's not for people that are under 18, right?
No, it's for 18 year old. But come on now, e-cigarettes are not for people under 18 either.
Actually, you know what? Pot is flavored, right?
Yes.
So it might qualify.
Well, I'm sure that they're going to have a lot of discussions at the Capitol about this. There's a bill that would allow qualified applicants to change their sex designation on their own birth certificate, which I find kind of interesting because we already passed a law here that your birth certificate could be amended. So I'm not sure why this one is necessary.
I think I'm going to want to testify on that one.
Well, we'll keep you posted on that one. There's an interesting one that would raise the minimum age to marry from 16 to 18. Now, what's interesting about this is it provides that minors may not marry even with parental or judicial consent.
Why would they want to do that?
It's interesting. I'm not sure. Again, we're just throwing out.
It's going to create more out of wedlock babies for sure.
Yep. Okay, and
that's weird.
And then there's one that amends the Uniform Parentage Act to allow non-gestational partners to voluntarily establish parentage of a child during the period immediately prior to or following the birth of a child.
Okay, so the word parentage is not currently in the law. It's currently called paternity. Think about it. Paternity is who was the dad scientifically, biologically.
There's
who was the dad?
There's gender in there, Jim. It's inappropriate.
Stay with me here. So currently, the law is asking who the dad is by who contributed the biological material. They're actually changing the whole concept from biology to sociology. When you switch paternity to parentage, parentage relates to who's the mom and the dad after the kid's been born. Parenting, right? So you don't have parenting until birth. Then you have parenting. And what they want to do is say to provide unwed parents, because there's a presumption that if you're married to a man and you're pregnant as a woman, your husband, there's a presumption in the law, your husband is the father of your child. That can be rebutted by actual evidence, but that's the starting point. So what they want to say is the health rules will provide that unwed parents of any gender identity would have the opportunity to voluntarily acknowledge the parentage of a child during the period immediately prior to or following the child's birth. It used to say paternity, and it didn't used to say of any gender identity. So they're taking out paternity, putting in parentage, and then throwing in gender identity. So there's a lot of things that flow from paternity.
And we will continue this conversation, Jim. We're running out of time, and I know you're getting passionate about this, but I want to just quickly go over that there are some sex trafficking bills that have been put in, gambling bills that would do a standalone casino in Waikiki or on Hawaiian homelands, legalizing sports betting, lottery, fantasy sports. There's a bunch of emergency order bills that are going to take care of that whole situation. That if you want to know more about that, look at some of our prior Faith in Politics. Jim has talked about the governor's orders, where ones requiring face masks until December 31 of this year.
And that was me and the beard when we were talking about.
So what we want you to do now is send us an email and let us know if there's topics that you want to hear, and we'll send some mugs to those that respond. And the other thing too is we want to thank Kalo TV and K-Light for their use of this beautiful studio and for making this production happen. Partner with us, and you can do that by visiting kalotv.com and klightradio.org. So
good show.
We look forward to seeing you next week when Jim and I are going to discuss the legislative process, and we might have a special guest.
Pastors, call us.
So we'll see you. Thank you so much for everything you do and for plugging in, and we'll see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.